the first wristwatch with a chronometer movement, the first wristwatch with decent water resistance, the first wristwatch with an automatic movement, the first wristwatch with a GMT complication. It's gotta be Rolex. Hey, what is up, watch fam? My name is Michael from Theo and Harris. Today is finally the day I'm going to do the video that I said I was going to do a few videos ago, and that, my friends, is the History of Rolex Part 1. I don't know how many parts there will be. I'm guessing 2, maybe 3, but I'm guessing 2. I'm not quite sure. Anyways, before we start any of that, I have to do a wristwatch check. So, funny story, I meant to grab my Rolex when I left my apartment and drove to my parents' house to shoot this video, and I totally forgot it, and I just put on the watch that I've been wearing, which is not a Rolex, so not fitting at all. But I am wearing a Cartier Santos. You guys have seen it before on other videos. I'm really debating on putting watch photos on my Instagram, but I don't know, I might start. But if you're looking for somewhere on Instagram to follow that has a lot of beautiful watch photos and not my beautiful face, definitely check out the Theo and Harris Instagram. They post a lot of vintage watches, and usually they're for sale. So if you really like them, you can go to theoandharris.com and buy them. Not mine though. You'll have to Anyways, without further ado, let's start with the history of Rolex. This is actually more about the history, not specific models yet. There may be an episode where I do specific models and talk about them, but the first part is really about the history of Rolex and how they became the most famous watch brand and most influential watch brand in the entire world. So just to start off, Rolex was founded by Hans Wilsdorf and Alfred Davis in London in the year 1905, 114 years ago almost. The big man behind Rolex, however, is Hans Wilsdorf. He is the guy that made Rolex what it is. No offense to Alfred Davis, I'm sure he was great too, but he was not Hans Wilsdorf, and that's kind of shown by the fact that Rolex is actually still a privately owned company, and they're owned by the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation. So Hans Wilsdorf, Rolex. Also Tudor, but this is not a history of Tudor. Oh, if there's a brand that you want to know the history of or see a video of the history of, comment that down below, and if you already see the brand that you were going to comment, if you can give that a thumbs up so it'll go to the top and I can see it, I will start researching that brand. So from the start, Rolex was not actually called Rolex. It was just Hans Wilsdorf and Alfred Davis getting imported watch movements and getting Dennison cases, marrying the two together, and then selling them to jewelers. And oftentimes jewelers would put their own name on the watch and then sell the wristwatch. But of course that all changed, and Rolex is Rolex because Hans Wilsdorf, I think they say while he was on a train, came up with the name Rolex for a bunch of different reasons, a bunch of theorized reasons, but the main two and the ones that stick are that he thought, one, Rolex was easily pronounceable in really any language, and he also thought Rolex kind of matched the sound of a watch being wound. So when you wound it, he kind of heard Rolex, which that's the weirdest thing I've ever heard. A small fact that I'm really not going to go into unless we do the history of Tudor is the fact that Hans Wilsdorf loved British monarchy and British history. That is where so much of this brand's essence comes from, is his love of monarchy and British history. Hence Rolex's logo being a crown, and also that's just such a brilliant marketing move now. Everyone wants a crown on their wrist, who doesn't? But also why his subsidiary brand Tudor is named after the Tudors, the Tudor family. And okay, here's why Rolex is Rolex. And the best way I can say this is by making a comparison to movies. So think of movies and think of the genres like horror, suspense, thrillers. Think about those and think about a really prolific director from modern times. Oftentimes the compliment they will get is that he is the new Alfred Hitchcock of those types of movies. And that's because Alfred Hitchcock was a major pioneer in the horror, thriller, suspense genre. So he is forever cemented in that role of, you're not the next famous director, you are the next Alfred Hitchcock, because his name became an achievement and it says you're a pioneer of something. And that's exactly what Rolex is. Hans Wilsdorf basically came into the world and said, you know, wristwatches are blowing up, they're becoming super popular, but there's something missing that the public needs, and that, of course, is reliability and precision. And that is exactly what Hans Wilsdorf did and did first, and that's why Rolex is Rolex. Wristwatches had a history of being not reliable. You had to make sure that your time was correct when you saw a clock in town, or you had to reference other clocks, you had to sync watches, so on and so forth. Rolex then in 1910 has a certified chronometer movement. I think 2 years after that they had a chronometer A grade, which basically means it was up to standards with a marine grade chronometer. Chronometer is a watch that's certified that it's been tested through a bunch of different circumstances like heat, cold, accuracy in different positions. Also has to have a sweeping seconds hand, and that's typically certified by the COSC company. So that's that's why you hear like it's COSC certified, because it has to be from an outside party. Basically, Rolex can't be like, oh yeah, our watches are the best, print that they're the best on the watch. Immediately then following that, in 1926, Rolex made another huge innovation following that same path of wanting a watch that's reliable and accurate. So the movement inside of a Rolex watch was very accurate, but the watch itself needed to be able to protect that movement, otherwise an accurate movement is nothing if it's destroyed. So in 1926, Rolex released the first waterproof watch. And when I say waterproof, I mean water resistant, and that's basically what all these vintage watch companies mean when they say waterproof, is water resistant up to 60 meters, 30 meters, 10 meters, 5, 3. Now Rolex made this innovation with the most famous watch case in history. You know it, I know it. If you like watches, you've probably heard it at least once, and that is the Oyster case. Usually known as the Rolex Oyster case, but of course it is now used basically everywhere. And obviously it's called the Oyster case because an oyster seals itself shut, keeps the water out, and then on the inside is a pearl. So the watch is sealed, and on the inside is the movement. Bing, bang, boom, Oyster case. So when we take a step back, what do we have here? We have a watch company that, 1, has the most accurate movements in a wristwatch ever, 2, has the first ever water resistant wristwatch, and 3, has one of the most easy to pronounce brand names ever. AKA, what we have is the biggest powerhouse in watchmaking that the world has ever seen and maybe will ever see. Basically, everyone knows what a Rolex is. Everybody knows Rolexes are expensive. Everyone knows Rolexes are high quality. That fact is basically ingrained in societal culture, and that is why your great-grandfather told your grandfather to get a Rolex. Your grandfather told your father to get a Rolex, and your father is either going to tell you to get a Rolex or I am, so you can call me daddy. And if you want me to cut that, just let me know. Because at the time, as wristwatches were growing in popularity, there was not another brand that made watches that durable and that precise that were also stylish in the world. So if you needed a quality tool timepiece, you had to get a Rolex. There were other brands, of course, but there were not other brands deserving of that crown logo. Although the crown logo was really not that prevalent yet, it was coming to terms, but it wasn't that popular. So I mean, we'll just say no other name had as much power behind it as Rolex did at the time for a reliable timepiece. And that's something very interesting that just stuck in society. It was like, oh, Rolex is a reliable brand. They found that out in 1920. Good for me. And then it just shot all the way now. 115 years later, people are still admiring Rolexes for their quality and precision, which is crazy when you think about it. Also kind of sucks for other brands now because they've caught up and also make great timepieces, but what can you do? Okay, so this is definitely going to be a 3-part series. I'm going to end the video here just because there is so much more that I have to say, and I don't want this video to be like 25 minutes, 30 minutes long. So in part 2 of this, I'm going to go into more specific early Rolex models, talk about them for a little bit, and I also really want to talk about all the achievements in the world that Rolex was a part of that helped skyrocket them to an even higher position in the watch world than they were already at. So anyways, that's all I have for you today. If you want to check me out on Instagram, toss me a follow right there. More importantly, if you want to check out Theo and Harris and vintage watches, a lot of them being vintage Rolexes, check out the Theo and Harris watch shop. Like I said, they have old Rolexes, Omegas, Longines, Tudors, anything that you can imagine, and I'll probably do a lot of history on those too. But thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys watching, thumbing up the video, and subscribing. So have a good dang day, okay?